Welcome to the Port Huron Statement. So this is part 2 of the Francis Duffield Shelden Flight from Justice. So we're going to go through a chronological rehashing of the FBI memoranda and the, subsequent information. So it first notes that on September 5th, 1928, Francis Duffield Shelden was born, and that he is described as a white male, 5'10", 150 pounds, blue eyes, and brown hair. They also note that he has been described as having as graying recently. Occupation is self-employed petroleum geologist of 22 years. His residence is 750 Green Hills Drive, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 48105. And his work address is recorded as 1956 Buell Building, Detroit, Michigan. It also notes that he is a member of one of the most prestigious families in Grosse Pointe. He is independently wealthy with international holdings, trusts, and stocks worth millions of dollars. The first sort of event that's pointed out is in March of 1955, a passport is issued to Francis Duffield Shelden for pleasure visits to France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. And then in March of 1961, another passport is issued for travel to Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, British Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, and Guatemala. Then the next events that are noted in the memoranda is Dier Grossman's employment at Blair Academy in Blairstown, New Jersey from 1961 to 1968, and then his work as a science teacher in Germantown, which has its own academy. Also notable is Sheldon and Grossman spend time in Honolulu in 1965 to 1966. In 1967, it notes that Sheldon travels to Key West, Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Panama, Guatemala, and all with his parents during a period of about 12 months. Other things that are notable is 1970-1974. Grossman is an employee at Camp Cabayun in Alton Bay, New Hampshire. His time at Germantown Academy was in 1968. It's also worth pointing out that in interviews where this period of time where he was working at these institutions was established, specifically Blair Academy, employees noted that students were discussing teachers that had more or less sexually exploited them, and that they were punishing them, which is pretty effed up, I think. July 23rd, 1975, the FAA modifies Francis Duffield Shelden's pilot license to demand that he wears glasses. Also in 1975, the Ocean Living Institute is established in Arlington, New Jersey, as well as the Church of the New Revelation in Kearney, New Jersey. April 9th, 1975, Sheldon and an associate get a ticket at this Cherry Creek School District, or District number 70 in Colorado. And this ends up being a lead of itself, and they're trying to track down this one teacher in specific because there's the specifics of this incident are redacted. We know that there's a traffic ticket issue, but there's other situations involved, and assumedly probably they prepositioned a child, but they're trying to get to interview this teacher that they never quite make it to. January 1976 is when Grossman establishes an address at Carmel, New York. May 27, 1976, call records establish that a call is made from Van's Garage in Leland, Michigan, to a number associated with Francis Duffield Shelden in Leelanau. In December of 1976, apparently an individual who had been introduced as a friend of Sheldon's and a student at University of Michigan was occupying Sheldon's Aspen home in the summer of 76 and the summer of 75. During this period, numbers associated with Grossman had placed calls to a couple different addresses in Columbus, Ohio. Also, in the summer of 1976 period, it's notable that two different interviewees claimed to have seen Sheldon's, quote, son, and even claimed that he had come alone to retrieve the four-wheel drive vehicle. Now, it's not clear if the son is the same person that was staying at the house during the summers or not, although, it's not likely that it was a son, though maybe, but it's probably some type of protege. June 1976, Sheldon travels to Antigua, Aspen, Chicago, and all across the U.S., per the Moore family. Joe Moore, who's a close friend of Sheldon's, picks up Sheldon's new Piper Seneca from the factory in Florida. And then subsequently, Sheldon stays at Moore's place in Charlevoix, in Michigan, frequently. In July 1976, Dier Grossman contacts Sheldon along with other individuals associated with Gerald Richards regarding his arrest and information that's being shared with the police and the likelihood of a potential, investigation and warrant. Sheldon then scrubs the home and eventually, sells the home in Ann Arbor. In fact, in August 30th, 1976, it's reported by the Detroit Free Press that Sheldon and Grossman have fled, and the FBI later determines that they flee to Walnut Creek, California, initially. Maybe initially, it's shaky. There's a lot of different things going on. September 1976, Sheldon resigns from Cranbrook Institute of Science in Boys Republic, which is a school for delinquent boys in Oakland County, Michigan. He claims in the letters he'll be gone for a long time. And again, he sells his Ann Arbor home through his attorney in September 1976. Sheldon's plane at this point is hangared at Gordon Aviation in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is likely directly associated with another Gordon Aviation we discover that occurs on the west side of the country, and a Gordon that is integrated in the boylover movement. But anyways, Sheldon flees Ann Arbor per the FBI's memoranda in September, if not August of 1976. And the suspicion is that he goes to California and or Aspen and or Antigua in the immediate aftermath of leaving Michigan. In late September, early October 1976, Jack Mole, the chief of police of Charlevoix, Michigan, and one of the key investigators, is asked by the FBI to make a search of North Fox Island. And he really ultimately just hunts deer on the island, and and casually searches while he's hunting deer. He notes that there are fresh aircraft tracks on the North Fox Island runway that couldn't have been made more than 2 weeks ago, especially given he describes the recent rains and this, that, and the other thing, and it's it had to be within this period of time. And it seems accurate. So that would suggest that either Francis Sheldon or someone else had visited North Fox Island in late September, early October of 1976, immediately before Jack Mole casually searches while hunting deer. And it's also worth noting that Jack Mole points out that he's friends with Sheldon, has a history of deer hunting on North Fox Island, and he's also familiar with the owners of South Fox Island and has a history of, spending leisure time on South Fox Island, which he feels is pertinent to mention on multiple occasions in the memoranda, which I thought was a mistake, but it's clear it's not, because he mentions both islands in a couple different memoranda, and it's clear he's identifying it as different, but being similar. October 5th, 1976, Wendigo Ranch Incorporated is formed in Colorado with Sheldon's Aspen property, 0104 Sabine Drive, Aspen, as the address. The purpose is to utilize this as a shell company to hold on to assets for Sheldon while he's a fugitive, to create a layer of obfuscation. It's initially registered with the corporation company, which creates a parallel to a lot of CIA and intelligence community operations. Sheldon transfers that very property, 0104 Sabine Drive, Aspen, to Wendigo Ranch to hold the property, and eventually he transfers this to the state of the Virgin Islands, or the Trust of the Virgin Islands Limited, which is a shell trust that's designed to aid Sheldon in his fugitive status, but ultimately just serves as a vehicle to aid Adam Starchild stealing from Sheldon, but that's whatever. By November 3rd, 1976, a letter from Michigan State Police is sent to the FBI and is reflected in a memoranda, and in that that letter from Michigan State Police is a letter from Sheldon to a redacted recipient, or at least a description of it, and a little bit of it, kind of, photographed or whatever. It mentions Camp Cabayun, and a few camping trips would cure that, as a reference to whatever they had been previously talking about. And it utilizes the Church of the Revelation P.O. Box return address, P.O. Box 553 in Kearney, New Jersey. And in the contents, the Harvey School is referenced. On November 24th, 1976, Sheldon is officially charged in Port Huron for third-degree criminal sexual conduct involving an 8-year-old and a 14-year-old boy. The notice to appear is sent to Ann Arbor. Sheldon does not appear for court and isn't seen in Ann Arbor since September. Now, let's also realize, though, they don't actually file the charges until November 24th, 1976. This is 5 months after they arrest Gerald Richards. And they arrest Gerald Richards because they have an overwhelming amount of evidence on their network. I mean, it's not just Gerald Richards, it's also Francis Duffield Shelden. It is incredibly, unbelievably irresponsible that they take 4 or 5 months, just let him run. And then they issue the warrant, and then the Washtenaw prosecutor is Carl Richards, who sits on the warrant for an additional 4 days. And then Traverse City also issues a warrant for sodomy of a 10-year-old boy on North Fox Island. By November of 1976, this is a period of time when, in later interviews, Sheldon's housekeeper in Aspen claims that he is living in Majorca, Spain, in interviews. December 6th, Sheldon sends a letter to Charlevoix to a young boy, and the postmarking is from Miami, Florida. Individuals in Washington State, California, and New York all claim to have encounters during the 1976 holiday period with Sheldon and or Grossman. By late December, Sheldon makes a call to another young boy from a Texas phone number, a young boy in Michigan. Sheldon applies to be a sponsor with California Big Brothers Big Sisters in December of 1976. And then Joe Moore, a friend to Sheldon, who I think is like a senior in high school, and he may even be the son, commits suicide after he learns of the scandal, that it's going to hit the news. He's the guy that flew around with Sheldon when he got the plane. Sheldon sends flowers to Moore's funeral. Moore's family also receives a letter from Sheldon in spring 1977, which is also postmarked from Miami. Also in December of 1976, Gordon Lindsay, born 3/3/1976, of 5433 Orchard Lake Road, Marine City, Michigan, confesses to boylover movement involvement. He works at the Port Huron YMCA and indicates without confirming that he uses it as a scouting and hunting and grooming ground. He is at that time found to be in possession of dozens of explicit boylover magazines, and 18 8mm reels of child pornography that end up getting turned over to the FBI. It redacts so much it's hard to know how that happens, but it's like, so you get a bunch of PNOG from this guy that he produced and had developed and everything. Like, what the... And then it says he gets, uncooperative and stuff. Gordon also is found to have dozens of subscriptions to boylover magazines and is caught with photographs of himself with nude boys. He's clearly directly involved in assisting Sheldon in his escape through Gordon Aviation, and an associated shell designed almost certainly to aid Sheldon in the possession of property on his behalf. So, and even beyond that, he's clearly very cognizant of this whole thing and ends up just being an uncooperative witness and getting hostile. And so I find it absurd that they don't just arrest him. So Sheldon's Piper Seneca that he had gotten and tested out with more just like a year before is sold in Provo, Utah in late 1976, early 1977 to another Gordon Aviation in Provo, but we'll get to that later. January 1977, Sheldon's family is at Mill Reef Club in Antigua from early 1976 to April 1977. The FBI determines Sheldon's parents were there before Sheldon arrived, though it is pretty well established that Sheldon does arrive during this period at the Mill Reef Club and meets up with Adam Starchild to finalize the establishment of the trust company, the Virgin Islands Limited. Sheldon also supposedly stays at Oakwood Motor Lodge at 9920 South Tacoma Way, Washington, while supposedly scouting for Ocean Living Institute, and is also reported to have spent New Year's Eve in Washington with people that were familiar with him at University of Washington. The motel staff at Oakwood Motor Lodge noted a large amount of camera equipment that was being brought into the room. February 1977, February 18th, federal charges are finally filed for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. So it's not until February of 1977 that a national warrant is issued for Francis Duffield Shelden. They know he's left Michigan so well that the Detroit Free Press publishes it. The Traverse City Record-Eagle knows it even earlier, but they don't issue a federal warrant until February 18th, 1977. That's more than, 8 months later? Michigan State Police on February 22nd, 1977, first become aware of the Ocean Living Institute of Washington State via a cohort of Sheldons that is serving time in Jackson Penitentiary. They also report interviewees claiming Sheldon is living in California and staying there and scouting places and individuals associated with his institute, including Grossman. Eventually they discover that Sheldon has a tenant at his Aspen property who is a real estate agent that claims to have never seen him in person and sends his rent checks to the Buell address. By February 28th, 1977, the U.S. Marshals are issued warrants for Sheldon. On February 11th, 1977, when Sheldon's twin-engine plane, which was sold in Provo, Utah, is found in Arizona, the pilot's identity is redacted. The buyer notes that expensive personal belongings were found in the plane, but later, in subsequent memoranda, it is stated that these items are, quote, trash. Also, 2 interviewees associated with the plane claimed that Sheldon is in South America in February of 1977. Late February 1977 is when federal charges are sought by U.S. Attorney Philip Van Dam for fleeing prosecution and crossing state lines. Again, the federal warrants aren't issued until February of 1977, well after they already knew he was a fugitive. It's irresponsible. April 9th, 1977, Sheldon reportedly buys fuel at Sardie Field in Aspen, Colorado. Though the exact date isn't established, they know it's around this time based on how apparently they marked their sales. March 10th, 1977, Phil Clark, postmaster of Walnut Creek, California, identifies a likely fraudulent, and turns out to be entirely fraudulent, procured P.O. Box for the Church of the New Revelation Foster Program and Child Welfare Charity. He had business cards with false credentials that were given to him by Sheldon, Grossman, and likely Starchild, who were claiming to be, child professionals associated with the Church of the New Revelation. Their payment expires on the 16th of 1977, and he informs the FBI that the mail will be returned to senders after 10 days per post office policy. But after determining that the business cards display fraudulent identities, deception, false credentials, aliases, and that all these businesses are directly associated with child exploitation, it's insane that they just let the mail get sent back. Anyway, March 15th, Sheldon's plane, a plane associated with Sheldon, is apparently serviced in Denver. Now, there are these suspicions that he has access to a Bonanza or a Comanche. March 17, 1977, despite the potential haul and the provable fraudulent nature of the P.O. Box in Walnut Creek, California, P.O. Box, all mail is returned without producing any material evidence or leads. March 18th, Sheldon's reported to be a regular at Port Huron Howard Johnson in interviews with staff, though they aren't able to provide records. They claim that they have provided them to local police, though it's never in the FBI files at all. It's never really followed up with. March 22nd, Lansing Oldsmobile dealer close with Sheldon moved to West Palm Beach, Florida in February 1977. This individual proves to have been continually in contact with Sheldon and Grossman throughout 1977 and seems to have his own deep and dark criminal history, and they glean this from a couple of different interviewees associated with their leads, and a couple of them in prison. March 28th, Sheldon suspected to have purchased a plane or to have access to an aircraft through Gordon Aviation 719 Airport Drive, Ann Arbor, Michigan, or another company, hangar, etc., in southeast Michigan. Unclear if Bonanza, Piper Seneca II, or another aircraft. Multiple members of the Air Force Reserves attest to his having another aircraft, and they dedicate themselves independently to discovering where the aircraft is being hangared, though they don't ultimately find where it is. April 5th, 1977, the Aspen property is transferred to the Wendigo Ranch, which was formed in October 5th, 1976. So the Wendigo Ranch Company is formed in October 5th, 1976, and the Aspen property is transferred to the Wendigo Ranch in April of 1977. And then this is the point in April when the property manager formally establishes that he's renting the property, though apparently he had been answering the phone before then at that address, and again claims to have never met the principals of Wendigo Ranch. April 6th, Sheldon noted to be found in Aspen phone book by FBI. So this is weird because this is the first the memoranda claims this in April 6th, but they clearly had known this, so it's weird, but I guess I did make a note of it because it just mentions his 0104 Sabine Drive and then the number associated with it. April 7th, alarm system discovered at Aspen property. So they discovered that he has an alarm system associated with it, and that alarm system had displayed a false alarm on April 11th, 1976. According to the police that they interviewed subsequently. They also, on April 11th, interview, obviously different special agents, a Stockton State College, and it's redacted name and whether they were a student or employee, but they claim to know Sheldon and have seen him in the past 2 years, and were familiar with the setup of the Ocean Living Institute in New Jersey. They tell the FBI that Sheldon was scouting property for the school camp associated with the Institute, mostly on the West Coast. April 13th, Adam Starchild continues to dodge special agents from New Jersey, claiming to be on business in Texas and soon to return. He sends a letter to Detroit suggesting he will contact via telephone from Houston and that he is having problems with the New Jersey FBI office. It's all obfuscation technique. It is eventually discovered that he's not actually in Texas, but most notably in Antigua, on and off, setting up the trust with Francis Duffield Shelden. April 18th, FBI Fugitive Update. Charlevoix Police Chief Jack Mole, who's noted and admitted to being a friend of Sheldon's, notes awareness of a vehicle registered to Sheldon parked at Charlevoix County Airport. Mole also mentions familiarity with South Fox Island without provocation, seemingly as though the FBI already knew that they were linked. He also reveals that he has been sent a letter from Francis Duffield Shelden, a personal letter, in September 1977, postmarked from Ann Arbor. Mole claims that it's a mail drop, that Francis Duffield wasn't actually in Ann Arbor. He doesn't show the letter to the FBI. Instead, he tells them about it in a letter and claims that he's giving it to Michigan State Police, which is kind of weird because the FBI is the one that's capable of doing national and beyond manhunt. And you know he's left the state most likely. Like, why would you give it to MSB? I mean, especially if you're like, oh, well, it's a mail drop, so he's not actually in Ann Arbor. So then you're claiming that you know he's not in Michigan, so why are you giving it to Michigan State Police who are limited to investigate just in Michigan? April 22nd, Olympia, Seattle, FBI memorandum identifies that Grossman had received a Washington State license plate for a commercial vehicle that had been previously owned by the Harvey School in New York. On April 26, Big Brother Aviation in Nashville, Tennessee, had piloted a plane to Charlevoix, Michigan. Although they claim to be unfamiliar with Sheldon and Grossman, they are found to likely be in connection and associated with Father Buds, and so they likely were aware of Francis Duffield, and they're not pressed nearly enough. Late April, FBI expands search to Honolulu, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Denver, Boston, with new leads. Camp Cabayun, noted as associated with Sheldon, Grossman, and follow-ups are made. And the University of Hawaii has redacted contacts that are mentioned. A lot of this, I don't know more details because it's heavily redacted. May 13th, 1977, New Times Magazine has been issuing a series covering Sheldon's crimes and flight to a captive boylover audience over many updates and chronicles of the manhunt and case. So they note that the New Times Magazine is sort of chronicling the manhunt and flee from justice of Sheldon. May 19th, they interviewed John Porter of 97 Everett Street, New Haven, Connecticut. He admits to be a lifelong friend of Grossman. He's known him since he was a child. He also knew Grossman's parents, claims to not have seen Grossman in 2 years. May 19th, John Porter, 97 Everett Street, New Haven, Connecticut, who admits to being a lifelong friend of Dier Grossman, but not having seen him in about 2 years. He has a lot of really creepy stories about Grossman's childhood, and admits to being an avid participant in the boylover movement, and eventually gets really standoffish. May 25th, 1977, the New York Division has an interview with an individual that implies to have had contact with Sheldon as recent as 4 months prior, so within the year of 1977. He refuses to provide recent photos of Sheldon Grossman, though he implies that he has them. There's a second individual that is mentioned in the memoranda that then is noted for becoming upset as well. It's very strange. A lot of redaction. It mentions Hunter College in New York City. On June 7th of 1977, Grossman is ID'd by boy and girl associated with a red truck on Highway 101 in California. June 8th, a Massachusetts interviewee connected to Camp Cabayun who claims to last saw Grossman within 2 years, suspects that they're living in New York, but claims to have no current knowledge of the whereabouts. On June 9th, another Massachusetts interviewee claims to have last saw Sheldon in March 1976 and had gotten a letter which he claimed the return address was smudged just a few months prior in April of 1977. And this is over and over again. They're like, oh, I don't know where it came from. Oh, I don't have it. June 13th, redacted identity claims that Frank Sheldon is at the Reef Club in Antigua. He also claims that the Sheldons were there from December of 1976 to March of 1977, that the parents were upset by Frank Sheldon's charges, that they returned to Grosse Pointe in April of 1977, and that they regularly go back to the Reef Club, and that Francis Duffield uses it as a hideout. Sheldon's mother claims in June that Frank has been in the Orient. Sheldon is claimed to have condominiums in Aspen by one of the interviewees. And this interviewee also claims that you don't need a passport to go to Antigua, just a birth certificate. June 15th, another redacted identity claims to have met Sheldon in California, and they were planning a boys' camp in the Pacific Northwest, assumedly the Ocean Living Institute that's going to be in Washington or Oregon. This person believes that Sheldon was in Antigua in June of 1977, otherwise in the Pacific Northwest. And then they also noted that Sheldon would need help consistently from his father to get money, because Sheldon's money was now coming from a business involving himself and his dad. And I think that because the problems with Adam Starchild were starting pretty early, so he started to depend on getting some money from his dad because he wasn't easily accessing the money that he was setting up with Starchild. And that gets reflected in the lawsuits between Francis Duffield Shelden and Starchild, and Francis Duffield Shelden and the Detroit whatever bank. June 21st, an interviewee mentions a boys' camp in Vermont and activities in Arizona. Also mention a boys' ranch in Amarillo, Texas, which is noted to be Methodist Church affiliated, and to be familiar with Sheldon. And the interviewee, again heavily redacted, but they note that the interviewee himself has a, quote, interest in child pornography. June 23rd, 1977, Houston special agent establishes branch location for Trust Company of the Virgin Islands, which is 1 Allen Center, Houston, Texas, 10th floor. They discover it's an answering service. They also discover that Starchild's the only person associated with the trust, like that's a registered agent. Then, on August 9th, 1977, in Aspen, an interviewee claims that Sheldon spent most weekends in Aspen during the winters of 1973 through 1976. He also claims that Sheldon was flying a twin-engine Cherokee Comanche, and then mentions connections to a Monarch Aviation, which ends up being another name for one of the aviation companies that ends up owning the Piper Seneca. One they're doing business as, it's another name. August 30th, North Carolina, a man that's interviewed is familiar with Sheldon and familiar with the prominence of the family. He claimed that Sheldon could, quote, go anywhere with his plane, that he had made modest modifications, could fly by instruments, by visual, fly at night. Suggests Sheldon is hiding out in Antigua as well. He had previously recommended Sheldon for the Board of Governors at Cambridge Institute of Science in Bluefield Hills, Michigan. He had also noted that Francis Duffield Shelden had helped young men through college with a scholarship program. This might be how the son kind of emerged, which may have been Joe Moore. Last saw this interview. He last saw Sheldon in June 1977, so just 2 months maybe prior, and it's wild. So he's saying that he saw Sheldon just a couple months prior, and it's like, you know. Anyway, September 7th, 1977, John Porter forwards a letter from Grossman to Camp Cabayun colleague. So apparently John Porter had a letter that was from Grossman to someone at Camp Cabayun, and it discusses Sheldon bouncing between the U.S., Canada, and Europe, brags about the oceanographic programs and new businesses. It mentions that that Grossman has to resign from the Camp Cabayun board. And then the individual, though, that supposedly it's addressed to at Camp Cabayun claims not to know Sheldon but to know Grossman, and claims that they couldn't make out the return address or postmark, and again, these letters just never find their way to the FBI, and they never know where they come from. September 12, 1977, the FBI fugitive alert is renewed. October 12, 1977, special agents of the FBI suspect that Sheldon is, quote, back in Michigan area. They don't really give a lot of reasons why. October 13th, 1977, they interview someone at the Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington. They identify Sheldon and Grossman. They also identify that they were familiar that they were wanted by authorities when they last saw them during Christmas of 1976. They claim that they had mentioned that they were wanted, but there was, bogus charges or whatever. They were talking about opening the Ocean Living Institute and recruiting boys and property, and they were talking about how it's all going to blow over type stuff. At that time, Grossman was mentioned that he was living in the mountains area of California, and that Sheldon was visiting him there. On October 4th, 1977, an attempt to interview Starchild results in him still dodging them, but they discover that he had been living on and off with a young male, an underage male. He had been using an address in New Jersey that was shared with another business, and so they end up catching with that guy, and that guy kind of gives him dirt on him. On November 7th, 1977, another attempt to interview Adam Starchild ends in obstruction. November 28th, the Moore family is interviewed in Charlevoix. The family of Joe Moore, who had committed suicide in December of 1976. The Moore family admits to receiving a letter from Sheldon in spring of 1977, postmarked from Miami. In the letter, it claimed nothing happened between him and Moore. The Moore family claims that Sheldon was friends with the family for over 15 years and was a perfect gentleman. They also mentioned that Sheldon would travel all across the U.S. and Florida and often to Antigua. They mentioned the travel to the Seneca factory. In December of 1977, late December 1977, it's noted that Alger Sheldon takes possession of the vehicle at Charlevoix Airport, and it's also noted by Jack Moll that Sheldon has another vehicle in Leelanau County at the Sugarloaf Ski Lodge. On December 6th of 1977, according to the New York Bureau, Grossman is living in San Francisco area and notes the case. Routine use of cover ruck. Also, a letter surfaces postmarked for late October from Washington, D.C., or to Washington, D.C., with a return address in New Jersey, believed to be connected to Grossman and Sheldon. So one of their addresses associated with these businesses that they're sharing and bouncing letters around with. This is another example where so many details are redacted, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. In January of 1978, January 11th, the FBI receives info that Sheldon is living under an assumed name and often visiting or living in West Palm Beach, Florida. They learn of a meeting to be arranged between Sheldon and another member of the boylover network in and around West Palm Beach in the near future. They discover that the individual that formerly owned the Oldsmobile dealer in Lansing, even though his name is redacted, is now living in West Palm Beach, and they identify him as the likely other associate. They're kind of piecing together multiple different informants. They end up getting bank accounts. They notice that money's getting moved from a a bank account associated with Sheldon to this account associated with this guy from Lansing that just moved on to West Palm Beach as Sheldon was fleeing Michigan. Then they have another interviewee in Columbus. Apparently, they were able to trace this guy because a number associated with Sheldon had called long distance this guy in Columbus, and then he tells the FBI that Sheldon's planning to meet a third party in Florida in the spring of that year, 1978. He also mentions that a plane is stored in Pontiac Airport that he has access to. In January 1978, the Ocean Living Institute is found to have recruited and developed connections with staff at the Totem Girl Scout Camp Council at Camp Robbinswold. Totem Girl Scout Council at Camp Robbinswold, Eldon, Washington. It further gives details about Sheldon's close association with this Lansing Oldsmobile dealership individual, though it's mostly redacted. It then further states that this individual may have further information on Sheldon's whereabouts or plans. Then a follow-up is planned with Totem Girl Scouts Council and Robbinswold Camp. January 20th, right by the Sea Apartments in Delray Beach, Florida, is identified as having an individual that matches the description of Grossman staying there for a period of time. January 22nd, St. Clair Police and Michigan State Police claim to have exhausted all leads and awaiting FBI advisement. February 1st, 1978, memo between Tampa, Detroit, and Cincinnati FBI mentions Dr. G.L. Urbaugh as involved in the boylover network, February, and pedophilia networks. February 2nd, Colonel Odell identifies that Sheldon has alternative aircraft available to him and that Sheldon could make a trip from Michigan to Florida to Antigua using the Bonanza or Piper or Comanche that they suspect he has. February 9th, a redacted interviewee claims to have spent summers at Sheldon's Aspen cottage. February 13th, former tenant of Sheldon's Aspen home saw Sheldon and his wife at an Aspen party in summer of 1976. I don't think Sheldon had a wife. February 15th, source advises known subject planning to meet Sheldon in Florida in 3 to 4 weeks, then travel to Central America. So this is the meeting, a memoranda on the meeting. So Sheldon has summer home in Antigua, the Antilles, and home on Red Mountain, Aspen. So they're suspecting him to meet this individual in Florida and then continue on with or without this individual to Central America. February 17th, Cincinnati Memorandum. Grossman's unlisted number in service in Columbus, Ohio, traced via calls from Sheldon's Aspen address, though the recipient denies awareness of either Sheldon or Grossman. They claim that the residence was being house sat by another individual during the time in question, and that the actual owner was in Aspen, Colorado. That's just funny. All right. Then in February of 1978, they interview someone in Washington, D.C. that was friends with Sheldon as a child. Claims to have last heard Sheldon went to California 1 to 2 years ago to found a new institute. Claims to have talked to Grossman before Christmas 1977. And apparently it's a she. Claims that they never indicated that they were wanted and she didn't know that they were wanted. She also claims to be in touch with Sheldon's parents, but not as close with Sheldon. February 28, 1978, the FBI contacts FAA to place a stop on Sheldon's Piper Seneca aircraft. So he supposedly sold it. There's 2 other aircraft that they think he's likely got access to, but they, for the first time, put a stop on that Piper Seneca. It's so weird. March 2nd, lead sends special agent to Knoxville. though the individual that they're seeking for interview ends up fleeing the area. They end up talking to a lawyer representing him. He says he doesn't expect him back, so they place it on RUC status. March 3rd, 1978, Delta Airlines Flight 1149. This is the schedule where they're supposed to tail Sheldon. They think Sheldon's going to be arriving in West Palm Beach to make this meet, but then all of the resources get pulled from it. They're not able to keep eyes on Sheldon. He supposedly switches seats, and they lose him. It's unbelievable. They had eyes on him, too. They had eyes on him. And then all the resources just evaporate, and he gets away. Yep. In March 10th, 1978, there's an interesting interview where the interviewee mentions that Sheldon and him grew up in much the same way, raised by governesses. And he went on to say that he had solved his problem with women, while Francis had not solved his problem with women. Okay, March 21st, self-proclaimed lifelong friend of Sheldon's, who had worked at the Lansing Oldsmobile assembly plant, is interviewed and claims that Sheldon purchased 2 planes, a Piper Seneca and a Piper Comanche, in his lifetime. He also claims to have traveled with Sheldon to Amsterdam, Antigua, and Boyne ski resort. The reason Sheldon was so often in Charlevoix was to ski, he claims. He claims to be hired in the summers to repair, maintain, and expand the North Fox Island accommodations. He claimed that Sheldon would never mention traveling anywhere in case he had to hide from someone, is what he quotes. He claims that Sheldon has oil wells in Texas. He has no idea that Sheldon liked children or little boys, but he had no awareness of Sheldon ever having a, quote, girlfriend. March 27th, a memo explaining why aircraft can't be provided for Sheldon's flight is provided. It more or less says that the FBI didn't have the resources and the other things had to take priority. It's responded to with the memo by the Detroit office that says, "Thank you for your excellent hospitality and support in the joint operation." It seems pretty tongue-in-cheek. March 31st, 1978, Beechcraft Bonanza registered to Layette Tubular Products at 3100 Lasser Road, Birmingham, Michigan, is suspected to be used by Sheldon. April 11th, friend of Abner Grossman is contacted by the FBI, which is Dier Grossman's father. This interviewee claims to not have seen Grossman since he was 6 years old, but also mentions to having a proclivity to the boylover movement. April 12th, memos note frustration with several aliases being utilized in California by Sheldon and Grossman. They note constantly receiving information suggesting Sheldon's travels frequently outside the U.S., especially to South America and to Antigua. May 18th, 1978, Mountain West Aviation at Sardi Field, formerly Monarch Aviation, is interviewed regarding their knowledge of Sheldon. They claim to have known Sheldon for 3 years. They claimed that Sheldon frequently stopped at Sardi Field every weekend in winters from 1975 to 1976, coming in Friday and leaving on Sunday. They were holding keys for his four-wheel drive Blazer. They observed Sheldon in winter 1976. They claimed that he had removed the keys for the last time at his last visit to Aspen around Christmas of 1976. They also noticed that it was common for others to grab the keys, and they noticed that Sheldon's son, or the person that was staying there, whoever he was also frequently using the four-wheel drive vehicle. And this is also one of the interviews where someone mentions that they had last seen Sheldon with his, quote, son. June 13th, 1978, FBI Caracas verifies that Francis Duffield Shelden's parents are at Mill Reef Club in Antigua. June 23rd, the Houston special agent re-interviews new leads associated with Robbinswold Camp and Totem Girls Council. And they follow up this Denton Construction associated vehicle in West Palm Beach. So Denton Construction is also found to be a company to be associated with Francis Sheldon through a series of different shells. In September of 1978, a fugitive alert is renewed by the FBI. By December 30th, 1978, the Porter Foundation of 2200 Spalding Drive, Northeast, East Dunwoody, Georgia, is found to be associated with the boylover movement through John Porter and through other individuals. They found like a common like mail network and commonality of like recipients of these boylover magazines that were like found to be defunct, and they were able to get some of their like outgoing mail lists and like Rolodexes. So yeah, and then they found that Sheldon sent a letter to Porter, but they refused to share it. And then after that, it's just a bunch of routine use of cover, 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 and the whole thing collapses and is ended and is over. So that's a litany of the whole thing.